Who do children belong to? Who gets to decide what your children are taught and how they're raised? Is it the government? Is it parents? Some combination of both? These questions, once virtually universally agreed to in our nation, are now some of the most contentious issues of our day. And they have enormous consequences for what sort of a nation we will be. But the history of America and the higher law itself provide a clear answer. Children belong to parents, and parents have the right and duty to direct their children's upbringing and education. When human law honors and recognizes these rights, nations and people flourish. But when human law ignores parental rights, people and nations suffer. While parental rights is a broad concept with many applications, this lesson will focus on one aspect: education. The United States has seen an assault on parental rights in the context of education. So education will serve as a great case study for examining what parental rights are and how to apply the higher law to a specific context. Parental rights come directly from the higher law. I'll highlight just two of the many lawyers and philosophers who anchored the right of parents to raise and educate their children in the higher law. First, leading 17th century German jurist Samuel von Pufendorf called parental authority over children the most ancient, the most sacred kind of rule under which children are bound to respect the commands and recognize the superiority of parents. Parental rights, he said, arise from the natural law itself. Specifically, parents' authority derives from the law that's written on every parent's heart, the natural affection that they have for their child. But more importantly, Pufendorf argued that the created order and scripture shows that parents have authority and rights over children, a claim that is superior to that of any other human institution, including the government. Consider the created order for a moment. God creates humans, which gives God authority and rights over them. And then humans have corresponding duties that they owe to God. Well, just as God brings people into the world and has rights and duties over his creation, the same is true with parents. Parents, not the government, bring children into the world. Parents, in effect, create children, bringing something into the world that was not. This amazing act of generation gives parents both rights and duties towards their children. And in this way, parents image God as they raise and instruct their creation, their children, under the ultimate authority of God. Building from Pufendorf and Scripture, William Blackstone, the famous English judge, called the parent-child relationship the most universal in nature. Blackstone argued that the higher law gives parents three principal rights and duties towards their children: their maintenance, their protection, and their education, which, according to Blackstone, was the most important duty of all. Given these principles, the English common law recognized the right of parents to direct their children's education and moral upbringing. Parents educated their children at home, through tutors, or by sending them to private schools, all without governmental interference. But not all nations have embraced parental rights, and certainly not in education. When governments dethrone God as the king over creation and put the state, the government, at the center of the universe, parental rights go out the window. Consider a few case studies. First, Sparta. Now, this might seem like a strange choice, but it perfectly illustrates what happens when higher law is ignored. Everyone might remember the Greek city-state Sparta for its military prowess. We even have sports teams named after it because of this. In Sparta, this city-state itself was the purpose of all things, to preserve it, to expand it, to bring it glory. Accordingly, in Sparta, individual Spartans were viewed as a means to an end. They simply had no value in themselves except that which they could bring to Sparta. This philosophy, which directly contradicts the higher law, had massive implications for parental rights. By law, Spartan parents had almost no rights over their children. Children were viewed as the common property of the state. Indeed, after birth, the Spartan elders, that is, the government officials, would evaluate male infants. Those who were deemed to be well-built and sturdy were permitted to live, as they, of course, would further Sparta's military objectives. But babies, children, who were deemed unfit, were simply left in the wilderness to die. And it was against Spartan law for parents to educate their children how they saw fit. When children turned 7, they were forcefully removed from their parents' care and sent to school, which was a military training system designed to create warriors. Sparta, of course, isn't alone. In all totalitarian states, one of the first things governments have done is to remove the right of parents and private organizations like churches to educate children. The Nazis did this in Germany, and the communists did this in Soviet Union and China. Rather than allow educational freedom under parental control, these totalitarian states passed laws that forced all children to attend government schools at very young ages. Children were viewed as property of the state, and education was no longer about developing the child and furthering parental goals. Education was about turning the child into a good Nazi, a good Soviet, a good communist. Consider further the Nazis, who revamped the entire German education system after gaining power. To quote Bernard Rust, Hitler's education minister, Nazi education would be the beginning of a process of transformation whereby the total life of the people was to be refashioned in harmony with the philosophy of National Socialism. And through compulsory education and mandatory after-school programs like the Hitler Youth, almost all of a child's waking hours were spent under the influence of the Nazis. School curriculum was completely revamped to indoctrinate children in Nazi ideology. When children entered the classroom, they had to Heil Hitler 3 times and sing Nazi songs. Children did science experiments that were designed to teach them the power of being purebred, and they read stories that portrayed Jews as parasites and untrustworthy. In one children's story, Jews were portrayed as a poisonous mushroom that needed to be destroyed, lest it kill the German people from within. Indoctrination happened even in math class. For example, students were asked questions like how much money the German state wasted on caring for inferior races and other undesirables. In short, Nazi curriculum was constructed with the singular aim of destroying the individual and transforming children into committed National Socialists. This also meant that the teachers were highly controlled. The Nazi Party forced teachers to join the Nazi Teachers Union, and they fired anyone who was deemed not loyal to the Nazi Party. Teachers had to attend summer camps where they would read Mein Kampf and learn Nazi ideology. But what about America? Thankfully, America has long recognized the higher law right of parents to educate their children. At the founding of our nation, leading law professors and legal commentators reiterated the natural law right of parents to raise and educate their children as they saw fit. And early American cases upheld the right of parents to direct their children's education. But this doesn't mean we haven't had our issues too. But thankfully, the Supreme Court has upheld parental rights. In 1925, the United States Supreme Court found unconstitutional a law that purported to force all children to attend public school. Interestingly, the law was designed to prevent Catholic parents from sending their children to Catholic school. The court held that the law violated the right of parents to direct their children's education, noting that the child is not the mere creature of the state. Those who nurture him and direct his destiny have the right, coupled with the high duty, to recognize and prepare him for additional obligations. Notice the language. Children do not belong to the state, they belong to parents. And parents have the higher law right and duty to direct how their children are raised and educated. Almost 5 decades later, in 1972, the Supreme Court held that Amish parents had the right to refuse to send their older children to public school in defiance of a compulsory education law. The court stated, "The primary role of parents in the upbringing of their children is now established beyond debate as an enduring American tradition." Again, note the language. Primary role, beyond debate, enduring tradition. These are eternal principles that transcend any momentary human laws. So how do we apply this? If parents have a higher law right to direct their children's moral upbringing and education, what does this mean for law and policy? Well, at its most basic level, parents must have the right to decide where their children are educated. Whether that means homeschool, private school, public school, or some hybrid model. The state simply has no authority to tell parents how or where their children are educated. And thankfully, all 50 states recognize this right, although with differing limitations. But beyond that, higher law principles mandate that, from a policy perspective, the state should seek to facilitate parental control and choice in education. This would include school vouchers, education savings accounts, tax deductions, charter schools, and more. In other words, government involvement in education should be designed to facilitate what parents want in educating their children, not furthering the state's ends. But what about public school? Do parents lose all rights when they send their children to public school? This is, of course, a hotly debated question. As proof, look no further than the 2021 Virginia gubernatorial election. Thanks to the comments of Democratic candidate Terry McAuliffe, who indicated that parents had no rights in public schools, and Glenn Youngkin's emphatic assertion to the contrary, Youngkin, a no-name Republican in a light blue state, won the same office held by Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson. Today, many states and school districts are claiming a monopoly over children once parents send them to public schools. As one example, some states and school districts are implementing policies that deliberately prevent parents from knowing their children's declared gender identity, while the schools actively facilitate the opportunity for the child to live out their new gender identity at school. Here's how these policies work. These gender policies grant privacy rights to every student, along with the right to live out or express whatever gender identity the student chooses at school. Once a student decides that he or she is a different gender, maybe after meeting with a school counselor and hearing about gender identity in the curriculum, well, the policy mandates that the school facilitate the child's social transition to this new gender. This means that the school must call the student a new name, use the student's preferred pronouns, and allow the students to use bathrooms and locker rooms and play on sports teams that correspond with the student's gender identity. But what's worse? The policies specifically instruct school officials not to tell parents about the child's transition, particularly if the parents are deemed by the school as non-supportive or non-affirming. These policies create a situation where children live out one identity at school, being called a different name, wearing clothing of the opposite sex, using different restrooms, but then go home as if nothing has changed at all. And worse, school officials hide this information from parents, deliberately talking to parents using the student's birth name and biological pronouns. This way, parents won't know what's happening at school, so the student's privacy can be respected. Parents then are cut out of what is arguably the most difficult thing a child might ever go through in their entire lives. And these policies aren't the exception. They're becoming the rule. By one estimate, there are approximately 1,060 such policies in the nation, and likely more. And these policies cover more than 10 million children. Yes, 10 million children attend a public school in the United States where they can live out a completely different gender at school, and school officials are obligated to hide this information from parents. But it's not just the policies. Some schools are indoctrinating children in gender ideology using LGBTQ inclusive textbooks, transgender reading days, and sex ed curriculum that teaches children about puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. Some districts use tools like the gender unicorn. Designed for children as young as 5, teachers use this friendly purple unicorn to walk children through a journey of self-discovery where they can learn their true gender identity. Students are asked questions about their gender identity and their gender expression and the gender that they're physically and emotionally attracted to. Under each category of question, students can select male, female, or choose other genders. They're also asked to note their sex assigned at birth. This is the term gender ideologues use to refer to biological sex. But in the worldview of gender ideology, sex is just something that the doctor arbitrarily assigns to you when you're born. Instead of a doctor recognizing the biological reality of sex at birth, they believe that he or she randomly picks a sex for the child. This communicates that a person's sex has nothing to do with who you really are. Who you really are is your gender identity, and only you can discover that yourself. And school officials and the gender unicorn are here to help. Policies and curriculum like this violate the higher law. So what can be done? First and foremost, you can speak up. Whether you have children in school or not, don't stay silent. Edmund Burke famously said that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Citizens must exercise their First Amendment right to speak out against the dangerous claim that children belong to the government and the evils of indoctrinating children in gender ideology. Law often follows the culture, and we need brave men and women who will preserve a culture where parents' rights are respected and children are protected. You can also support organizations like Regent University School of Law, which is educating lawyers in higher law, or the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, which is defending the right to homeschool in all 50 states. Beyond that, parents must reclaim their higher law right to educate their children. If your children attend a public school, vote for school board officials who will respect your higher law rights. Get to know your children's teachers, review the curriculum, ask questions, stay involved in your children's education. But you could also remove your children from public school altogether and send them to private school or homeschool them. And you can support politicians who advance common sense school choice programs. Thankfully, America recognizes the pre-existing higher law right of parents to educate their children. And parents and citizens are the ones who must reclaim it.